Israel launching airstrikes targeting the country's missile and nuclear programs and senior leadership, with Iran now confirming its supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei is dead.
In the crowded alleyways of Mashhad in 1939, a boy was born into a modest clerical family whose destiny would become inseparable from the fate of modern Iran. Sayyid Ali Hosseini Khamenei grew up in a deeply religious environment, the son of a respected but not wealthy cleric. Mashhad, home to the shrine of Imam Reza, was a spiritual epicenter of Shia Islam, and from childhood, Khamenei absorbed both theology and the political undercurrents simmering beneath Iran's monarchy. As a young seminarian, he studied in Mashhad and later in Qom, Iran's religious capital. There, he encountered the ideas of a revolutionary cleric whose teachings would change the Middle East forever, Ruhollah Khomeini. Khomeini's message fused Shia theology with political activism, rejecting the Western-backed rule of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi and calling for an Islamic government guided by jurists. For Khamenei, this was not just theology, it was a mission. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, he became active in underground opposition networks. He translated works of Islamist thinkers, delivered fiery sermons criticizing the Shah's regime, and endured repeated arrests by Savak, the Shah's feared secret police. Prison shaped him. It reinforced his suspicion of Western influence and hardened his belief that only an Islamic system could protect Iran's sovereignty. When revolution finally erupted in 1979, the monarchy collapsed with stunning speed. The exiled Khomeini returned in triumph and the Islamic Republic was born. Khamenei, still in his 30s, was suddenly elevated into the inner circles of power. He joined the Revolutionary Council and became a key figure in shaping the new state. The revolution had devoured the old elite, and a new clerical establishment rose in its place. The early years were violent and unstable. Rival factions, leftists, monarchists, and ethnic separatists all challenged the fragile new order. In 1980, Iraq invaded Iran, launching the devastating Iraq War. The conflict would last 8 years and cost hundreds of thousands of lives. It also solidified the revolution's ideology of resistance. In 1981, Khamenei survived an assassination attempt that left his right arm permanently damaged. The attack elevated his status as a living martyr of the revolution. That same year, amid political assassinations and instability, he was elected president of the Islamic Republic. As president from 1981 to 1989, Khamenei operated in the shadow of Khomeini, who held ultimate authority as supreme leader. Yet the presidency allowed him to build alliances within the military, the intelligence services, and the emerging power centers of the state, especially the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. He cultivated loyalty carefully, understanding that in revolutionary systems, survival depended not only on ideology, but on networks. When Khomeini died in 1989, Iran faced a moment of existential uncertainty. The revolution's founding father was gone. The assembly of experts convened to select a successor. Many expected a senior cleric of higher theological rank to assume leadership. Khamenei was not considered a grand ayatollah at the time, but politics outweighed rank. Through backroom negotiations and urgent calculations about stability, he was chosen as supreme leader. The constitution was adjusted to facilitate his appointment. In one dramatic vote, he rose from president to the highest authority in the land. From that moment forward, Iran's political system centered around him. As supreme leader, Khamenei controlled the armed forces, appointed the judiciary chief, influenced state broadcasting, and oversaw key economic foundations known as bonyads. Presidents would come and go, reformists like Mohammad Khatami, hardliners like Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, pragmatists like Hassan Rouhani, but the supreme leader remained the final arbiter. In the 1990s, Khamenei consolidated power quietly. Reformist movements calling for press freedom and civil society emerged, especially under Khatami's presidency. Students filled the streets demanding change. Khamenei responded with caution but firmness. Newspapers were closed. activists were detained. The boundaries of dissent were clearly marked. The 2009 presidential election marked a turning point, when Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was declared the winner amid allegations of fraud. Millions of Iranians protested in what became known as the Green Movement. Demonstrators chanted for transparency and accountability. Khamenei publicly endorsed the election results and warned that unrest would not be tolerated. Security forces cracked down. The protests were suppressed, but the image of national unity was fractured.
And Mr. Karoubi did not accept the result of this election. Therefore, they do not consider Mr. Ahmadinejad to be the president. And yesterday, even we had the trial, 2 days ago when we had the trial, yesterday, in a reaction to the trial, both Mr. Mousavi and the former President Khatami, for example, Mr. Mousavi said that the confessions are based on the medieval torture methods, and Mr. Khatami said that it's unconstitutional. So they are keeping up the tempo and they are not going ahead with the election results.
Well, indeed, then, against this atmosphere, of course, the show trials, to paraphrase Khatami, have been taking place over the weekend. Obviously, Iran's political scene very much divided. To what effect has this had a deep impact? You said that there are notable absences for the ceremony today, but even beyond the government, to what extent have these trials had a deep impact on dividing Iranian society?
Internationally, Khamenei's Iran pursued a strategy of asymmetric influence. Through alliances with Hezbollah in Lebanon, militias in Iraq, and later involvement in Syria's civil war, Tehran extended its reach across the region. The so-called axis of resistance became central to Iran's foreign policy doctrine. Tensions with the United States remained constant. Decades of sanctions squeezed Iran's economy. Oil revenues fluctuated wildly. Inflation surged. Yet Khamenei framed endurance as virtue. Resistance to Western pressure became ideological identity. In 2015, Iran signed the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, nuclear agreement negotiated under President Hassan Rouhani. Though Ali Khamenei permitted the negotiations, he remained publicly skeptical of American intentions. When the United States withdrew from the deal in 2018 and reimposed sanctions, his distrust appeared vindicated in the eyes of supporters. But sanctions deepened economic hardship. Youth unemployment soared. Currency value collapsed. Public frustration simmered. In 2022, the death of Mahsa Amini, while in morality police custody, ignited nationwide protests under the slogan, "Women, Life, Freedom." Demonstrations spread across cities, uniting diverse segments of society. The state responded with force. Arrests mounted. International condemnation intensified. By the mid-2020s, Iran stood at a crossroads. Regional confrontations escalated, including direct tensions with Israel. Cyber warfare, proxy conflicts, and covert strikes defined a shadow war that periodically threatened open conflict. Then came the unthinkable, a direct strike targeting Iran's leadership. In early 2026, amid escalating hostilities, reports confirmed that Ali Khamenei had been killed in a coordinated military operation.
Hours ago, Iran confirmed their supreme leader was killed after those joint airstrikes from the U.S. and Israel. Thanks for joining us, everyone, at 10. I'm Robert Townsend. Tonight, NBC's Alice Barr leads off our coverage detailing the ongoing deadly attacks, now known as Operation Epic Fury.
In an explosion of violence in Iran, the U.S. and Israel launching airstrikes targeting the country's missile and nuclear programs and senior leadership, with Iran now confirming its supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei is dead. He led an intensely repressive regime in Iran for nearly 40 years. Earlier today, President Trump spoke directly to the Iranian people.
When we are finished, take over your government. It will be yours to take.
Iran's foreign minister had pushed back in an NBC News interview this morning.
Well, I think this is mission impossible. For regime change.
Iran is retaliating, firing attacks toward Israel and U.S. military bases in the region. President Trump monitoring closely with his national security team and speaking with Israel's prime minister, who argued this war will lead to true peace.
After nearly 4 decades at the apex of power, his rule ended abruptly. The shockwaves were immediate. State media declared mourning. Millions attended funeral processions. Behind closed doors, the clerical establishment and the 𝐟𝐸𝐫 maneuvered to shape succession. The assembly of experts convened once more, as it had in 1989. Khamenei's fall was not merely the death of a man, it symbolized the closing of a defining chapter in the history of the Islamic Republic. For nearly 4 decades, Ali Khamenei stood at the apex of power in Iran, shaping its institutions, directing its foreign policy, and influencing nearly every major decision that defined the nation's trajectory. His leadership came to represent an era characterized by revolutionary defiance, centralized clerical authority, and unwavering ideological conviction. Whether admired or criticized, his presence was inseparable from the identity of the modern Iranian state. To his supporters, Khamenei was the steadfast guardian of Iran's sovereignty. They viewed him as a leader who preserved the Islamic Republic during some of its most dangerous and uncertain years. After assuming leadership following the death of Ruhollah Khomeini, Khamenei inherited a country still scarred by revolution and war. The Iraq War had only recently ended, the economy was strained, and the young Islamic Republic faced internal political rivalries and external threats. In this fragile environment, he projected stability. Backers argued that his firm control prevented factional chaos and shielded the state from collapse during moments of intense domestic unrest and international isolation. Throughout his tenure, Iran endured decades of sanctions, diplomatic standoffs, and regional rivalries. Under Khamenei's guidance, the country adopted a doctrine of resistance, positioning itself against Western dominance and asserting its influence through strategic alliances and regional networks. Supporters credit him with transforming Iran into a decisive regional actor, capable of projecting power beyond its borders despite economic restrictions. To them, endurance itself became a form of victory, proof that Iran could survive pressure without surrendering its revolutionary principles.
Thousands of Iranians gathered in the streets of Tehran to mourn the death of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who was killed in his office on Saturday morning during a U.S.-Israeli attack. U.S. President Donald Trump, in a statement after the strike, called Khamenei one of the most evil people in history and urged Iranians to take back their country. Following the killing of Khamenei, Iran retaliated. Several loud bangs were heard in Dubai for a second day on Sunday after Iran launched retaliatory strikes on the neighboring Gulf states. In response to U.S. and Israeli strikes on the Islamic Republic, Iran has said it will target U.S. bases in the region. It has hit a range of other targets.
We were on vacation in Abu Dhabi and we were caught by surprise with the strikes, and we are waiting for the situation to settle down. We are waiting for more information regarding our returning flights.
It's just nervous of we're not being told what's going on necessarily. So yesterday it was against the military bases, but then when we woke up we found out that the airports had been hit. So it's the unknown. So my daughter's meant to be flying back today, so we're going to find out if the airport's open. So that's the unknown, that's the nervousness, what we're concerned about.
Major Middle Eastern airports, including Dubai, the world's busiest international travel hub, were shut on Saturday after U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran.
Yet, critics saw a far darker legacy. They argued that Khamenei's consolidation of authority narrowed the space for political pluralism and reform. Over time, the institutions of the Islamic Republic increasingly reflected the priorities of the Supreme Leader's office. While elections continued, the vetting of candidates and the oversight of political discourse ensured that meaningful challenges to the system's core structure rarely gained traction. Dissent was frequently met with suppression, especially during large-scale protest movements that erupted at various points during his rule. For critics, Khamenei embodied rigidity. They contend that his suspicion of Western engagement limited opportunities for diplomatic breakthroughs and economic integration that might have eased hardship for ordinary Iranians. Periods of negotiations such as the nuclear talks that culminated in agreements during the presidency of Hassan Rouhani were carefully managed and publicly framed with skepticism. Even when compromise occurred, it was cautious and reversible. When international agreements faltered, the cycle of mistrust deepened, reinforcing hardline positions at home. Domestically, generational change placed increasing strain on the system he oversaw. Iran's population grew younger, more urban, and more connected to the outside world through technology and social media. Economic pressures, from inflation to unemployment, compounded frustrations. Protest movements revealed widening gaps between segments of society and the ruling establishment. To some observers, these tensions suggested that Khamenei's model of governance, rooted in revolutionary ideology, struggled to adapt to evolving social realities. His fall, dramatic and sudden, carried immense symbolic weight. It was not simply the end of an individual's life, but the disruption of a carefully balanced power structure.
Now, his death is going to set up a new moment for Iran. Iran has only had two supreme leaders so far, the ruler Khamenei, who led the 1979 revolution, and Khamenei, who came into power in 1989 and led Iran through decades of tensions with the United States over its nuclear program, as well as its support for proxies in the wider Middle East. In theory, Iran should have an assembly of clerics come together to pick a new supreme leader. However, that has not been announced yet, and it remains unclear whether Iran would be able to do that given the fact that it remains under this American and Israeli airstrike campaign. This also calls into question the calls by U.S. President Donald Trump for the Iranian people to rise up and take back their government, a direct call for Iran to overthrow its theocracy. We've not seen any unrest in the streets that would signal that such a move is underway, but the death of Khamenei had been...
For decades, Iran's political rhythm revolved around the supreme leader's guidance. Presidents operated within boundaries shaped by his office. Military and judicial leadership answered ultimately to him. Foreign policy calculations reflected his red lines and strategic outlook. Removing that central figure inevitably triggered uncertainty. Inside Iran, reactions were complex. State institutions emphasized mourning and continuity, presenting his legacy as foundational to the nation's resilience. Public sentiment, however, was layered and diverse, reflecting years of economic strain, political debate, and generational divides. Internationally, analysts speculated about succession and a potential recalibration of Iran's domestic and foreign policies. Would a new leader maintain strict continuity, or would internal pressures push for adaptation? Historians now debate the meaning of Khamenei's era. Was he the stabilizer who ensured that the Islamic Republic survived regional wars, sanctions, and internal unrest without fracturing? Or did his concentration of power limit the evolution of political structures that might have made the system more flexible and responsive? The answer likely lies somewhere between those extremes. Leadership in revolutionary states often demands firmness, yet over time, that firmness can harden into inflexibility. What remains indisputable is the scale of his influence. For 37 years, Ali Khamenei was not merely Iran's highest authority. He was the axis around which its political system turned. His guidance shaped economic strategy, military doctrine, media narratives, and diplomatic posture. His approval or opposition could determine the fate of major initiatives. Few leaders in contemporary history have exercised such prolonged and centralized authority over a nation of Iran's size and complexity. The rise and fall of Ali Khamenei mirrors the broader story of the Islamic Republic itself, born from revolutionary fervor, consolidated through ideological resolve, tested repeatedly by internal dissent and external confrontation. His leadership embodied both the strengths and the limitations of that system. As Iran moves forward, seeking stability amid change, the shadow of his long rule inevitably lingers. Whether regarded as defender or disciplinarian, visionary or obstructionist, Khamenei's imprint on Iran's political landscape will endure for generations.